Once you got your driver's license, what was it that really started to be a big deal for you?
I wanted a car.
I wanted a car.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So what did you do about that?
I started researching, looking at the various deals, and basically just kind of decided I wanted a car. Like
Okay. So how did you decide what kind of a ar you could get?
I didn't really. I kind of like looked at my money and was like, I could afford this, but like didn't put together a budget or anything really. Just kind of.
Okay. So how did you know how much you could afford then?
Based on the amount of shifts I could probably get in a month.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I kind of like was like, oh, I can get my dad to pitch in, and then I'll just like slowly pay him off, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you look at paying cash for it or payments, or how were you thinking you would?
Cash.
You're going to pay cash for it?
Yeah.
And then pay him off, so you sort of borrow from your dad and then pay him?
Dad. Yeah.
Okay. So how did you know how much you could afford to pay for a car? Was that based on how much he would lend you, or how much you could afford to payments on, or how did you determine that?
I just assumed he would give me whatever I wanted.
Okay.
He had previously helped out my sister and her husband getting a car.
Okay.
And I just assumed that was kind of like a pay me back whenever you could. And yeah, that wasn't the case. But
It wasn't the case.
no.
So how did it work then?
I went to my dad and asked him how this would work for him. And he basically outlined that he had made a full deal with my sister and her husband with a 24-month kind of contract, basically, and that they had to have it paid off to him within the 24 months.
Oh, okay. So how did that impact your decision?
The car I could afford, the amount went down, I guess.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so basically there was some hard reality you had to face then on how much you could afford.
Yeah, definitely. I was
Okay.
kind of, my fiance and I this had been a thing where I was like, I want a car really bad, but we've been fine using public transit, and our money's like, my money's soon going to be his money. So it's definitely, like we were discussing it, and I wanted the okay from him, not just like, do whatever you want.
Right.
More like, I need your approval. And then, so it was a big thing, but we were fighting about it, and then I went to my dad, because I was like, Dad will be on my side.
Okay.
And that wasn't the case.
Okay.
My dad kind of walked me through the budget and was like, I think you might want to hold off on that.
So what did you do?
I humbled myself and just shut up about it around my fiance.
Okay. But did you get the car?
No,
You
I didn't.
Okay, so you decided after all not to get the car.
Yeah.
And do you regret that?
No, I would be so stressed out right now, and I'd probably have a car sitting in my lot and still be taking the bus.
Okay. So you decided not to pursue it, and you're not sad?
No, I'm not sad. I
Okay.
have friends who have cars.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great story for us to kind of launch where we're going with this talk. So thank you for sharing that, Rachel.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about buying based on emotion this morning, because that is more common than what we probably want to admit to. Now, Rachel has been very open and transparent with us this morning about her desire for a car, but then later when she thought about it and kind of put the hard facts together, she realized this probably wasn't a great idea. Often it doesn't go that way. Often we end up pushing until we get what we really want, and then we pay for it dearly later. Well, this morning I want to look at what Jesus had to say about this. So we're going to look at what Matthew said Jesus said. Now, Matthew was a very close associate of Jesus, So this is not like third-hand hearsay. Matthew actually heard this firsthand with his own ears, and then he put it down in the Bible. And the Bible, the New Testament in particular, is the most reliable ancient document we have on earth by far. So that's why we trust it. We trust it as a profound resource for understanding God. So let's look at Matthew and see what he says Jesus said. We got it there? Matthew chapter 25. Okay, starting in verse 14. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on a trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, "Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more." The master was full of praise. "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibility. Let's celebrate together." The servant who had received 2 bags of silver came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more." The master said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, "Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back." But the master replied, "You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it." Then he ordered, "Take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away." Now, this story has some profound principles in it, and they can be applied to a number of different kinds of situations. But the truth is, it ultimately revolves around money. And so I want to talk about money with you this morning. Now, the first and most obvious thing about this story is that they don't all start on the same playing field. They don't all get the same amount to start with. One guy gets 5, one guy gets 2, another guy gets 1. And I don't know why Jesus chose to do that, or to tell the story that way. But one of the things that's a fact in life is that we don't all start with the same resources, we don't all have the same starting point. Some people grow up in wealthy families, some people grow up in poor families. Some people win the lottery, some people slave away all their life and barely make a living. Some people have disabilities, some people have, all kinds of things going for them have talents and skills and things like that. We don't all start on a level playing field. And the truth is, where you're born makes a huge difference. We all live in Canada. We don't even really know what poverty looks like here in Canada, to be honest. Compared to a lot of places in the world, we are all wealthy. But that's not necessarily because we earned it or we deserve it in any way. It's just the way it is. And quite frankly, sometimes I've questioned God about stuff like that. I've wondered why. Why is this not fair? And there's a lot of people that can get angry with God and blame God for stuff like that and not be able to come to grips with why life is not fair. And the honest truth is, I don't know why life isn't fair. I wish I could stand up here and tell you, this is, you know, the reasons and this is how it all works and all that. But I can't. I don't understand all the ins and outs of why. Now, having said that, God gave mankind free will, and we can choose how we live our lives, and how we live our lives can affect our situation here on earth. And the good news is that when God gets a hold of people, do you hear that ringing in there? I'm hearing some ringing back here. Is there, well, yeah, is there a way to fix that somehow? Okay, sorry. So when God gets a hold of people, there's a sense in which He creates a generous heart in us, and that changes the way we react to the unfairness in this world. Now, I'm going to share with you a fact that I learned last summer. I read a book called Factfulness. I highly recommend the book. It's not a Christian book per se, but it talks about some of the facts in this world that the media don't necessarily focus on, and that we just naturally tend to kind of ignore for some reason. And this is a fact that nations that have been highly influenced by Christian thinking in the last 100 years have done a profound amount of help to the nations that started off very poor in the last 20 years. And in the last 20 years, we actually, as a global community, have seen more than half of the people in desperate poverty move out of desperate poverty because of Christian nations, quote unquote, helping in those situations. So that's some profoundly good news, even in the midst of the unfairness, that I just wanted to share with you. When we are generous with one another, we can actually change the unfairness situations in the world in very, very beautiful ways. And that is actually going on around us. But the truth is, even in spite of all of that, there's still... Hello. There's still unfairness. And the unfairness still is inexplicable in many ways. Now, Jesus makes clear in this story that it's not what you start with that's the most important. It's actually what you do with what you start with. That's sort of the whole point of the story. And we see two guys here that didn't start on the same playing field, but they did what they could with what they had. And Jesus is talking glowingly about them. He says, well done, way to go, guys. But then there's one guy who is different from the other two. And the one guy reacts to his situation out of fear. He lets emotion drive his decision to do what he did with his finances. And he ends up scared, and so he just pulls back and buries that bag of money and just waits for whatever. And so Jesus really is teaching us here that when we make decisions based on emotion, we often make poor decisions. See, the other two guys probably were scared too. Let's face it, investing money is a scary thing. How many of you have ever invested and been scared when you invested? Yeah, I've been scared, very scared at times. I've lost sleep over investments or purchases on occasion. But if you allow those emotions to drive your decisions, you will make poor decisions. That's just the reality that we face. See, because when emotions take over our decision making, it actually stops us or causes us to not be able to think logically. Some of you know that I love studying the brain. So the logical part of our brain is what they call the frontal lobe. It's right here behind your forehead. The emotional part of our brain is more in the middle of the brain, sort of in the center of our head. And there's a chemical released in the middle part of our brain when we are highly emotional that actually literally shuts down or dampens the ability of the frontal lobe to function. What does that mean? Basically, when you're highly emotional, you get stupid. That's what it means. Bottom line, when you are worked up, you're not thinking straight. And when you let fear take a hold of you, you're not going to make good, sound, logical decisions. Bottom line. And Jesus basically is reinforcing that idea in this story. And the truth is, often when we have strong emotions, that's an indicator that there's some wounds in our heart that are being aggravated, that need healing. And that's exactly what Jesus is here to do. I usually think of it this way. When my emotions start to really run high, whether it's fear or anger or some other kind of emotion that's really overpowering me, it's like a light flashing on my dashboard. You know, the check engine light goes off, and it basically means you need to look into this, Dallas. There's something going on under the hood here, and you need to figure out what this is, or something bad is going to happen. And so when I feel overpowering fear or anger or something like that, the best thing I can do is not make major decisions. It's actually to stop and slow down and say, okay, God, show me what's going on. Why am I feeling like this? What's the deal here? And as I do that, God begins to help me see maybe there's a wound there that he wants to heal, something happened in my past or whatever. Now, with regards to financial decisions, we often are driven by positive emotions. We buy things because we think it'll make us happy. And let's face it, there's a whole marketing industry out there, multi-billion-dollar marketing industry, all geared around you will be happier if you buy this. It's all about emotion. It's all about buying something to help you feel better. And when we succumb to that, we end up, well, here's the honest truth. The reason it works is because it works. Isn't that profound? You actually do feel happier when you buy what they say you should buy. But it's only short term. That's the problem. So you feel happier for a little bit, but then you come back to where you were. So what do you need to do now? Buy some more, of course. And so the marketers are after you again, and you buy more and feel better for a little while and then go down. You see, the truth is, if Rachel had bought a car, she would have felt wonderful until that first payment. She would have felt a whole new level of freedom. Maybe even it would have affected her sense of self-esteem. She would have just felt like she was now a full-grown adult. You know, there would have been all kinds of good things that would have happened to her emotionally, but it's short term. For those of you that have bought new cars or bought this or that, we all know that for a while it feels wonderful, but eventually it all fades away, and then we're back to square one. And so we live our lives going from emotional high to emotional low to emotional high to emotional low, and we need this fix over and over and over again. And it's almost like drugs, let's be honest. You know, we need our little fix in order to feel good. And sometimes it's not buying things. It can be, you know, sex, it can be relationships, it can be this, it can be that, but it's all around this whole emotionally driven decision-making process. And it gets very costly over time. But when we allow Jesus to heal our inner person, that's when we begin to understand that there's actually a better way to live. We don't have to live in this up and down world where we're constantly looking for the next thing to make us happy and then experiencing the slide off of that and then the next up and down and up and down. When you feel God's love in your heart healing you, you can actually have this sense of contentment that we talked about 2 weeks ago that causes you to be able to make good, rational financial decisions like Rachel ended up doing over time. And that pays off huge. And see, you know, I'm just going to talk about the gospel here for a second. Like, the gospel is good news. But it's not good news in the sense of, buy this and you will feel better for a month. The gospel is good news in the sense that if you embrace this, it will work its way into the very core of your being and heal your soul. And so you won't need all these fixes over and over again. You will actually be able to live a happy, contented life because of Jesus. That's why we sing these songs that we sang this morning. That's why we live our lives differently than the average person, because we have something on the inside that makes for an emotional stability that isn't available anywhere else except through Jesus. That, beloved, is the gospel in a nutshell. If you embrace Jesus, He will heal your soul. That's why He died, to pay the price so that you could be healed. It's a beautiful thing. And if you're here today and you've never embraced that healing power of Jesus in your soul, today would be a beautiful day to do that. Now I kind of sound like a salesman, don't I? I'm not trying to make you do an emotional decision. This is a decision you will never regret. It is a profoundly life-transforming decision. So these two guys, they had, for whatever reason, the capacity to be able to make good, solid, long-term decisions and not allow the fear to hold them back. And so what do? They start to invest, and then they do well. And this other guy who holds back, he ends up with basically nothing at the end. And I submit to you, that's often the way it goes in life. People who are driven by emotion end up maybe having some fun in the short term, but at the end of their life, they often end up further behind financially than people who are able to make good, solid, logical decisions. So the key really to living well financially boils down to what goes on inside of here. See, making good, solid financial decisions is actually not really rocket science. See, we can all, and maybe we all have, made a good financial plan at some point in our lives. The problem is sticking with it. Like, it's not hard to come up with a good budget or come up with a good financial plan. You can get all kinds of tools to do that online, or go to a financial planner, or talk to somebody like Ian who's got good experience in this, and they will be able to help you with that. That's not the hard part. The hard part is actually having the perseverance to make non-emotionally driven decisions when you feel that strong urge inside that I need this in order to be happy. And the budget says, no, you don't. And to be able to then make the logical decision instead of the emotional decision, that comes from the strength that God brings us. So I'm just going to give you a very simple financial plan. Now, this is one that Dave Ramsey basically basically, this is the kind of plan that Dave Ramsey talks about. Now, Harry talked about Dave Ramsey last week. I've talked about him before as well. We can even put that screen up on there. If you look in your sheet there on the left-hand column, see, this is Dave Ramsey, but there's points, I think, before this one, on the slide before. There we go. So here's a suggested budget. Put 10% into savings, 30% into housing, invest 10%, give 10% away, and then live on 40%. Now, the thing about this that is one of the key things is the percentages. When you live your life by percentages, or spend your money by percentages, it helps to take the emotion out of your decisions. And so you're not deciding, well, you know, I need this much or I need that much. You're just setting that and then adjusting your lifestyle to fit within those percentages. Now, these aren't just random things. These are, experts have told us this. If you go to the bank to get a mortgage, they'll look at your income, and they typically won't allow you to borrow more than your 30%, or the payment will be more than 30% of your income. Because experts basically say that that's roughly what the average person should be spending on housing. Having savings of 10% gives you a buffer there, like Harry talked about last week, where it gives you a sense of not being under the gun all the time. Investing 10% sets you up for retirement later on. Giving away 10% helps you live with an attitude of generosity, and that is key for mental health. When you live with an open hand towards other people in every way, it leads to a far better sense of mental health. And we'll talk more about that next week, actually, because that's a profound principle right there. And that's why the percentage for that, and then 40% to live on. Now, in the middle column, there's a place for you to just fill out where you are right now. And you might have to take this home and look at your finances and maybe even track them for a few days to get a sense of exactly where you're at. And then the third column, the right-hand column, is where you want to be. Now, this is just a suggested outline. You may decide, I want to be somewhere else, you know, and that's fine. This isn't rocket science. The key thing about this that I just want to mention is when you do it from a percentage standpoint, you can do it incrementally, the changes incrementally, so it's not so painful. So say, for example, you're only giving away 1% of your income, and you want to increase that for the sake of your mental health. Then you can say, okay, you know, I'm going to increase that to 2% or to 1.5%. And then you start moving from there, and maybe you're spending way more on your cost of living, and you can gradually start to decrease that and find different ways. And by doing it in percentages, you're setting yourself up to be able to make those adjustments in a less painful way than just ramming a template over your life and then trying to make all these radical changes all at once. So you just sort of gradually make adjustments until you get to where you want to be. And the other thing that I would suggest doing in this process, because it's very easy, like I said, to start off strong and then end up drifting away because you see a shiny thing over here that you just gotta have. So have somebody that you're accountable to. You know, meet with them once a month or once every 2 months, and just have them, give them permission to ask you, how are you doing with your budget? How are you sticking to your goals? And allow them to even look at the numbers. I had a good friend one time, and he used to say to me, you know, the best way actually to know how I'm really doing in my spirituality is to look at my Visa bill. Because when I'm not doing well spiritually, I spend money on all kinds of things I shouldn't. But when I'm strong spiritually, then I'm able to rein myself in and live within my budget. The other thing that I would suggest doing in conjunction with this is join a small group. If you're not in a small group, maybe join Ian's group in March. Or if there's another group and you've got friends in that group, join their group. And be part of a community of people that are all trying to move forward spiritually. It'll help you become healed on the inside. It's profoundly important. That's why we have our small groups in our church, because as you walk together with other people who are on the same journey as you are, it keeps you focused. It keeps you on track. And that is so important, because it's so easy for us to get pulled away, because let's face it, we're being bombarded by messages from every direction. Marketing is coming at us. You need this, you need this, you need this, you need this, you need this. And if we don't have other people who are trying to live a good, disciplined life walking with us, we'll much easier get swept away by all of these different things. So Dave Ramsey that I talked about, his picture is up here on the screen. I'll show you what he looks like. When Dave Ramsey was in his 20s, he actually went bankrupt. And he started to try to figure out what on earth is going on here. Like, how do I do this? And what he did is he actually went to the Bible to figure out what the Bible had to say about finances. And as a result of that, he's written a number of books and courses and stuff like that on finances. And he basically put together a budget just like the one that I just showed you. And he determined he was going to live by that budget. And there was many times where he was tempted to swerve, but he was determined, I'm not going to allow myself to do that. And he would pray and ask God for help, and God did help him. 2 years ago, in 2017, Dave Ramsey was 58 years old, and his net worth was $200 million US, just by following that budget. Now, he started several businesses in the process, and God has blessed him. But the key, and he will tell you this himself, the key was disciplining himself to stick to a budget. Here's the deal. I want you to think about this. If you were to live by a budget like this, something like this, and you would be able to see that work its way through your life, you were able to pay off your debts, you were able to get a savings account, investing and all of those things, and live generously and have your happiness come through that rather than coming through buying stuff. Imagine being able to have the finances where you would be able to bless people just because you feel like God wants you to. And you don't have to sweat about, how am I going to make this all work? Because you've been disciplined. And you've got the finances sitting there in the bank. Just think about that, you parents. we want to help our kids. We want to send our child to camp sometimes. I remember there were times where we were trying to figure out how are we going to be able to afford to do these things. Imagine having the resources to be able to send your child to camp or to this or to that and not having to sweat about how you're going to pay for it later. Besides what you would teach your kids by living that way. You think about that, just be a beautiful thing. You're leading by example, and your children are learning to live a life that's truly healthy. Harry mentioned this, and forgive me for repeating it, but it really struck a chord for me. Imagine if all of us were living like this so that we had the resources as a church collectively to be able to bless our community in such a profound way that people that are far from God would be sitting up going, what's with these Christians? Like they're just so generous. They're so good to us. Now, we've started down that road. We're giving to homeless men. We're giving into all kinds of other things. But just imagine what we could do together if we were all living this way, full on. It would be just amazing. So my question for you to think about this morning is, what emotions influence your financial decisions? Is it fear? Or is it pursuit of happiness? Is it retaliation? Whatever. There might be all kinds of different things. And whatever those emotions are, will you allow God into that area of your life? What might He want to do there? On the back of that card, the Connect card, there's just a few places where you can fill out what you feel like God is doing right now in your heart. I'd like you to take that card and just look at it. And if there's one of those that matches where you're at, check it off. Not fill out the other part there. So I want to be praying for you this week that God will work powerfully in your heart. So Pastor Michelle is going to lead us in a song, and I want us to just take a minute here to be a little bit introspective. Just be honest with yourself. Say, yeah, you know what? When you're saying that, Dallas, I realize there are some times where I'm really making emotional, financial decisions that are not helping in the long run. And then take it a step further and say, okay, God, what's this all about? Help me, Lord, see what's going on inside of me and come in and heal my heart. So I'm going to invite you to just sit for a minute while they're singing and allow God to talk to you. And, if you would like to pray with somebody, I'm going to invite the prayer team to come and stand over here by the cross again. And if you would like to pray with somebody, they're going to be there. They'll just stay there until everything's done here today, and you can find your way there and receive prayer as well. So go ahead and lead us, and then we'll just listen to God here for a minute.